All right, here with Paul Kiefer, the police accountability reporter for publiccola.com. How are you today?
I'm all right. How you doing?
Fantastic. All right. I came across this on the Emerald. It's actually originally published on publiccola.com. Saw it here on this South Seattle Emerald. Says despite months of arrest and impoundments, the car brigade is still protecting Seattle's protesters. You wrote this. Tell us about it.
Yeah. So in order to pull this together, it took about like a month of reporting, surprisingly. I wound up interviewing 5 members of what's called the Car Brigade. It formed in July in response to car attacks across the country. I think people probably heard about the frequency of car attacks on Black Lives Matter protesters in late May, June, and July. Car Brigade formed in response to that. It's people who provide a perimeter of a protective perimeter of cars around protests. I managed to get in touch with 5 of the drivers and with an attorney representing one of the drivers. I did a ride along. I got my hands on arrest reports and a pair of warrants and a warrant affidavit that shined a little bit of light into the arrests of Car Brigade members that have taken place between early August and the beginning of October. And what comes through from interviews with the Car Brigade drivers and then from the warrants and warrant affidavits is that on the SPD side, the SPD believes that the Car Brigade is not actually honest in its motivations. They say that the Car Brigade is not there to protect protesters. In fact, when Car Brigade is present at protests where something like property damage occurs, then Car Brigade is there to protect protesters from getting arrested and are therefore criminally liable for as accomplices to the property damage. But what the Car Brigade say is, 1, no, we are only there to protect protesters, and 2, these arrests, and there have been there have been over, I think, 17 people arrested, and there have been 13 cars seized, impounded, I should say. What the Car Brigade says is those arrests and seizures are intended to intimidate drivers out of volunteering for the Car Brigade, and therefore to strip marchers of their protective perimeter, and therefore to scare marchers into giving up, and so thereby ending the nightly marches that we've seen for over 150 days now. So that's the real gist of it.
Right. And now in going over some of this and some of the additional details here, it looks like in reading, it's not just a random officers who are making the arrest when Car Brigade members are arrested. You're saying that it's the detective units that are actually making the arrest.
Yeah, it seemed to sort of switch. So the first car brigade arrests actually were overseen by a sergeant named Michael Tietjen, who only 2 days before those arrests actually had tried to drive his car into a small group of protesters, and he said he was trying to chase a perp, and he was subsequently put under investigation by the OPA and put on administrative leave. So that's the first 3 arrests. Ironically, he was the person responsible for arresting a group of people who ostensibly were volunteering to protect marchers from getting hit by cars, like the one he was driving. But anyway, after that, the SPD seems to have been assigning whoever they have to these investigations into Car Brigade drivers that allege that they're part of a criminal conspiracy. So they've assigned people from the homicide unit, from the narcotics unit, from the internet sex crimes against children unit. You find there's Franklin Pablaki, who is a detective with the West Precinct's burglary squad, and who is notoriously a member of, or he's notoriously listed on the Brady list, which is a list kept by the city attorney's office and the King County prosecutors of officers with records of dishonesty who can't, in most cases, testify before a court. So Pablaki handled more than one of these impoundments, and when I say handled, it means that they assume responsibility for impounded cars, the items inside of them, and assume responsibility for kind of the investigation that they hope will lead to charges against the protesters, though none of them have thus far. But it's kind of a sign that the department is scrambling to assign resources to these Car Brigade arrests and actually shifting them out of other units, including out of the homicide unit, which is pretty overburdened right now. They're putting a pretty high priority on evidently on these car seizures because they view the car brigade as a threat.
Right. And something else I see here is that you're able to get a hold of an affidavit warrant. And in the warrant, it also listed some federal agencies in the warrant. Now, two things is one, how come you're only able to get one warrant? Are the warrants under seal, or you just weren't able to access them? And two, what, if anything, does that say that like federal agencies like the FBI or the ATF are listed there in the warrant?
So to answer your first question, the reason why I could only get one is, yeah, the SPD requested that they be sealed. They're specifically an SPD detective from the narcotics department requested that the warrant affidavits be sealed. So I managed to get one because I think it was sent in error to a driver and they sent it to me. But the reason why they said they sealed them was that, apparently if word of this investigation got out, it would threaten the investigation and threaten the security of law enforcement is what is said. So, evidently I have my hands on something that I'm not supposed to have my hands on, but what it reveals is that I think we already knew that, the SPD has been working with federal law enforcement partners on things like that, attempted arson at the East Precinct, that they've tapped the FBI and the ATF to get involved in protest investigations. And the fact that the ATF and the FBI were mentioned in this warrant affidavit as people taking part in the investigations of criminal groups responsible for crimes during protests and the fact that, then SPD was linking the car brigade to those criminal groups means that there's, possibility, but unclear because all these warrant affidavits are sealed, that the FBI could in some way be involved in the investigations of the car brigade members, which would mean that, they would consider federal charges, but that would have to go to a federal grand jury. And, there's not enough evidence probably for this to even result in charges from the King County prosecutor, let alone a federal grand jury. But nevertheless, it signals that SPD's collaboration with the FBI has not ended and may be more extensive than we know.
All right. And the other thing that I see here is that what you're saying is as of late, some of the tactics have changed and that the arrests are down and impoundments are down, but citations are up. Do you think that's a change, specific change in policy with SPD?
So what the attorney for one of the car brigade drivers told me is that, yeah, so first of all, in the past 2 weeks, essentially SPD has stopped arresting people and they've only been handing out traffic citations. And what the attorney for the car brigade driver told me is that she thinks it's because thus far the King County it's been, the first arrests were on August 14th. It's been a long time and there have been no charges brought against any of these drivers. And so she thinks SPD is kind of sick and tired of the prosecutor's office, the King County prosecutor's office, not pursuing charges, and will therefore find some other means to harass or intimidate drivers. I mean, that's how she casts it. And in her eyes, the citations are a way for SPD to sort of challenge or intimidate or harass drivers without having to lean on prosecutors. They don't, they can do it more or less without secondary support. And at this point, drivers have had to pay for, getting their car out of impoundment or, repairing broken windows, that sort of thing, pay bail. So, it's not like adding a financial burden is nothing. I mean, it's certainly less significant than having to face jail time or, losing your car for 2 weeks and then losing your job as a consequence. But it's repeated citations certainly aren't weak.
Right. And what do you say on the other side of this? Let me pull myself back up here. What do you say on the other side of this for people who are like, hey, I don't want cars blocking my neighborhood for an hour while I'm trying to get home, or, my street is blocked by the car brigade?
Yeah. So legally, protesters have the right to block streets with cars or on foot. It's protected. It's in the Seattle Municipal Code. And then theoretically, that right ends when SPD issues a dispersal order. But an SPD incident commander can issue a dispersal order whenever they want. I mean, it's just up to their discretion. So, in the situations in which people are blocking the street and SPD hasn't issued a dispersal order, a driver who is just impatient, who wants to get home faster, will still have to contend with the fact that the protest is protected by the First Amendment and it's protected by the Municipal Code. And then, if there's a dispersal order, it's worth asking whether the dispersal order was actually necessary or whether it's just, SPD doesn't like the convenience of protests that are protected by the First Amendment. And then, there have been, the other thing to note is that there are all these drivers who have gotten impatient with marches and who have then tried to drive through them. I mean, according to the car brigade, that happens on pretty much a nightly basis. Someone, usually an impatient commuter, but sometimes someone who's actively hostile against the Black Lives Matter movement or hostile to the Black Lives Matter movement, will try to drive through marchers, which is precisely why the car brigade has to be there, so that people don't get hit by, the person who wanted to get home 15 minutes earlier. So, all in all, the marches are going to continue as long as they can. I mean, the marchers and the car brigade are dedicated to that. The car brigade will have to be there because impatient commuters wind up posing a security threat to the lives of the marchers.
Right. And before I let you go here, just hitting right back here on the headline, you're saying despite months of arrests and impoundments, the car brigade is still protecting Seattle protesters. After your interview with these five car brigade drivers, their lawyer, protesters, what's your feeling in regards of momentum with the car brigade? I know that some people have dropped off, but some people have picked up. What's the overall momentum? Do you feel that they can keep up the pace?
Broadly, the impression I got is that they've lost probably half of the drivers that they started with in July. They started with this big mass of drivers in July. It was right after Summer Taylor got killed on I-5 and Diaz Love was injured. It was right after Molly Clark, another SPD officer who was off duty, tried to drive her car into a group of protesters on Olive. And was stopped by kind of a proto car brigade volunteer. So initially they started with like a whole bunch of cars, and now they've lost about half of them because of the threat of arrest and because of the threat of impoundment, and now because of the threat of repeated citations, which are a financial burden. Only a limited few people who are both in kind of the privileged position to be able to kind of hold a job even if they lose their car for 2 weeks, and who are also, absolutely certain that they want to be out there even if there's the risk of them having their window smashed. Only they are really able to stick around night after night, and it means that they are having to do less with more. And then there are tons of people who would love to be doing this work, but the consequences have been too great. Like I spoke to one driver who lost her job as a nanny because the mother of the kid she nannied for didn't approve of her going to jail and was worried about the spread of COVID. There have been people who they're involved in custody hearings right now, and they can't get an arrest on their record because they don't want to lose custody of their grandkids. So there are tons of people who are saying, I want to be out there protecting protesters because I want marches to continue because the movement needs to continue, but I can't because, as it stands, SPD has been arresting people at peaceful marches. So you can't necessarily guarantee that you won't get arrested if you're out there guarding a vigil. It happened to someone, they got charged with a misdemeanor, their car got impounded. You can't guarantee that you're going to be safe if you're driving home, because one guy got arrested in Edmonds by SPD. They actually didn't do a hot pursuit. They followed him to Edmonds and then turned on their sirens. So there's no guarantee that you can be safe in any way as a car brigade driver from SPD. And so people are now reticent to do it, and they're going to have to adjust tactically.
All right, Paul, before we let you go, how can people catch up with you? Are you on Twitter, your email?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Faruq_Kiefer. That's FARUQ_KIEFER. And you can email me at paul@publicola.com. And I'm responsive to both. So thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, we'll be talking to you soon.
Absolutely.